Jill, if you could go ahead and call the roll for us, please.
Mr. Keeley?
Present.
Mr. Rosensteel? Nope, it's going on. There it is. For the Director of Finance, Ms. Ortega? Chairperson Dillon, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We've had some technical difficulties with our mics and sound system this morning, so please bear with us. We are running a little bit behind. We're going to try to catch up. Jack, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you while I try to get my agenda back up.
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome our new board member. As you all know, we've been fortunate to hire Grant Boykin, and Grant will formally announce that tomorrow at the board meeting, who represented the treasurer's office for so long. But you have a extremely able person joining you, Steve Juarez. And we've known Steve and his many other roles and responsibilities, both at the Getty, when you actually remember you were active in corporate governance issues, and at CII, and then for a long time at the University of California, which has shared many of the same investment issues and governance issues that we have here. And Steve's already jumped in. Got a loose phone back there? Steve's already jumped in at CalPERS, I think, this week as well, right? If you've already had your, yeah. So, I think there won't be much orientation here. Steve is ready to go and join us. It'll be spectacular to have you here.
Absolutely.
To be here. My predecessor left the office in disarray, but. But nonetheless, no, I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to working with all of you. So thank you.
Welcome, Steve.
Okay. Hang on just a second, y'all. There. I lost my controller there for a minute. It vanished. All right. So our first order of business is to approve our agenda and work plan. I would entertain a motion to do so.
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
Seconded. I think it was Tom and Harry.
I think I'm not a member.
Oh, then
Betty.
we'll go with Harry and Betty. That sounds good. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was distracted when I moved my controller off my screen. So all in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. And our agenda and work plan have been approved. So we have a consent agenda. We have the approval of our minutes from the September 15th Comp Committee. That was our open session. I'd entertain a motion to approve. It's been moved by Betty.
Second.
Seconded by Paul. All in favor say aye. All, Nora, go ahead.
My name is not on I had to walk away from the committee, so I was present. Anyway, so.
You were here and then left and then came back perhaps?
No, it's just that you should put me as missing or whatever you want,
Oh, okay.
whatever. I don't know how to say that right now. But I'm on the committee, but I was absent.
Okay.
And I think I'm still on the committee, but I wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the roll call, you're not listed as being a committee member, so that's why you weren't called during roll call, but.
Okay. But I am.
But we'll correct that.
I thought I had agreed to be on the committee before, and I had been on the committee before, so I'm not sure what happened, but yes.
We'll
I'm
revise
here.
it.
Can we do that right on the fly here, Brian?
It was approved in the actual
You're the
agenda.
board chair, you're in charge of.
She's on the committee and she's here.
We'll note that. Thank you.
We don't have to put her as absent last time though. How's that?
No.
All righty. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. We have approved those minutes. And so our first item for information, Melissa, are you ready to go? That's our comp review study update.
Yeah, I can do that. Were you going to do the disclosure item before that?
It's just an information item, yeah.
We just skipped over that?
Hang on a second.
It's just a consent item.
Yeah, but it's been labeled wrong.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that on the agenda as part of the, hang on, I'll get there.
That's why I said register.
Oh, it's because there's not a page. It's on the agenda, but it's not on the page. Alrighty, so let me go back to the agenda.
Just, while you do that, I just want to point out that it's information only. It's a delegated item, so
I'm sorry, say that again, Brian?
The item is information only. It doesn't call for any action on your part. It's a disclosure item.
Hang on, I got to get with you.
It's a mistake
Oh,
to.
the statutory positions? It's just
Yes.
information, so we
It's
don't
just
need a motion?
information.
Okay.
It's
It's
disclosure.
labeled correctly on the item, but not on the public notice there. There's an inconsistency there, but it's an annual disclosure we do with you always.
All righty. Are there any questions about that disclosure then? All righty, we'll consider it disclosed. Okay, Melissa, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a compensation review update. As part of the work plan for the Compensation Committee, a labor market analysis is being conducted, and the results of that analysis is going to be presented to the committee in April. And McLaughlin has been requested to assist us with that analysis. In addition to the labor market analysis, a request was made at the committee meeting in September to consider the benefit value or total compensation to assist the committee in its review of compensation for designated positions. Michael Oak with McLaughlin was present during that September committee meeting and has provided 3 options for the committee to consider, and they are included on page 2 of your item. The options range from a very detailed analysis, which is that apples to apples comparison, which is reflective in the first alternative, to a more high-level total compensation pay analysis in the aggregate, which is reflective in that number 3 alternative. The results of any of the options, if the committee so chooses to select an option, would be included in the compensation review and coupled too with the understanding of CalSTR's internal equity environment. You were provided handouts, illustrations to assist you in your review of those alternatives. In addition, we do have Michael Oak with McLaughlin, who has called in for this item to be available to answer any questions if you have additional or for clarity on the alternatives that are being presented. So at this time, I'll turn it over to the committee for any questions.
I don't have,
And I just want to double check, Michael, are you with us?
You hear me?
Yes? Thank you.
Great.
all righty, so,
Well, I think the handouts are worth, you really want to know what would you do with the studies, not just what the
Right.
studies do. I think the purpose of Michael and the handout was to actually translate, to help you better make a decision. What, if you paid for those studies, what would you get out of it and how would it affect compensation? So it's probably worth Michael walking us through that.
okay. Did we have paper copies or we only have the downloadable?
I understand they were handed out. It might be in the folder that you have in front of you.
Thank you. All right. Michael, you want to walk us through those?
Sure. And
Thank you.
mind that these are very one rudimentary, high level, trying to give you some sort of visual to help you make a decision. We don't have a preference in terms of you could choose to do nothing or one of these 3 things or give us feedback and we come up with something else. So we don't have an agenda or preference to push you one way or the other. We really would like to hear your feedback in terms of what you'd like, and ultimately what you'd like is sort of what do you want to do with the data. So, having certain goals and objectives, you might choose one analysis over the other. But I'll walk you through the 3 alternatives that are presented. I'll try to talk about the sort of pros and cons and what you could potentially leverage the data for later, and then depending on what your need is, you can hopefully give us some feedback. So looking at alternative 1, which has a series of
Michael,
probably ugly color. Yes?
hang on just a second. Can we get his mic, the volume of his call up a little bit, please? Okay, go ahead, Michael. Just wanted to make sure that we
Okay.
could all hear you. That's much better. Thank you.
Great. So what you would get back for alternative 1 would be for each position, you'd receive a chart, hopefully prettier, but a chart with similar data that's shown on this example. So you would get, for example, the first The first set of bars, I'm colorblind, but I think it's blue and red, would be salary and cash bonus. That's the data that you're already getting. So that basically that's what historically you've seen from us in terms of salary and cash incentives. The next color, which I think might be a light green, is long-term incentives, and that would be relevant to the private sector, and that's data that you had not gotten from us before. So as you recall, and when we've done these pay studies in the past, there's always a footnote that says excludes restricted stock options, deferred compensation, mutual fund deferral, so on and so forth. So for the private sector, the data would be rolled in for those components. And then we also have the next bar on top of that would be what here is generically labeled as benefits. That would be, or could be, depending on what the direction would be, defined benefit values, defined contribution values, post-retirement health values, health and welfare costs, so on and so forth. Basically, the idea here would be for each of the positions, we try to get for you a total rewards view. And we recognize there's some moving parts here, so that's why there's 4 sets of charts. One would be, well, for a incumbent with less than 5 years of service, as an example, while the market pay for salary and cash bonus and long-term would be constant, the benefit value particularly for DB value would be less, whereas someone with 15, 20 years of experience on the right-hand side of the page, that value for the DB and other service-related benefits would be higher. And of course, we could also show pre and post PEPRA as needed in terms of the by position, sort of apples to apples, dollar for dollar. What are you paying on a total rewards basis versus what the market is? This would be the most comprehensive, obviously the most expensive, as you saw, and it would give you the best data in terms of trying to compare penny for penny, what are we spending for each position versus what the competitive market is for each position on total rewards basis. Questions so far?
Hang on a second, we'd have one from the podium. Go ahead, Jack.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding how to read the chart. So, because in the end, it matters how we apply it to the salary structure here. Is this just for the red bar, for example, on this alternative one that goes across is the bonus bar, the incentive bar. It's all the same across all the positions. Is this just for illustration, or I'm trying to understand?
Yeah, quickly make up data, yes.
Okay, some of the other bars are different sizes. So, okay. But so is it literally by individual position or by job class we're going to look at this in this example?
It would be however you want to get the results back. By position or job class, whichever way is more helpful to you, we can amend our methodology to fit that.
Okay, I obviously we're just the objective is to set broad ranges for the staff, not getting into individual performance. That's why I was trying to understand the bonus part of that. Are we actually just looking at the opportunity bonus range?
Yeah, this would be
not the actual bonuses of the staff?
This would be well, it could be done both ways. It could be looking at the average actual across a bunch of people, or probably a better way to look at it would be what's the maximum incentive, which is historically how we looked at with you these numbers. So,
okay.
It would be, for example, it could be the minimum, midpoint, and maximum of the salary range, along with the associated maximum incentive.
I would think that if using the actual incentive that an individual had received would create too much volatility in some of the calculations that we would make if we were using individuals' actual incentive paid as opposed to a position and using the range. Would that be right, Mike?
Yes, yeah. We would suggest that looking at on a position basis, not a by person basis, would be the best way to go.
By position, okay. Jack, good? All right, go ahead and continue.
So imagine then that you'd get similar charts. Again, this is very rudimentary, not very pretty. You get similar charts for each of the positions that are covered. Alternative 2 is to say, okay, well, if you don't need on a position-by-position basis, so if the intent of your question in September in terms of how are we considering benefits when we set our compensation, if you don't need to look at benefit values on a position-by-position basis, then alternative 2 would say, okay, well, we can look at total benefits spend in aggregate, and this is perhaps the exhibit here would really just be 4 numbers. You'd have, which isn't really shown on the page very well, you'd have 4 numbers. One would be CalSTRS to say, for these positions, CalSTRS actually spent in benefit value, as an example, $100. And then to the right of that, you'd have 3 numbers, the market 25th, median, and 75th. And what we do is we take we'd basically be answering the question, if peers employed the same people that CalSTRS, the same positions, and we applied peers benefit offerings, so DB values, DC contributions, health welfare, so on and so forth. If we applied peers benefit values to the CalSTRS population, what would those funds have paid? So if CalSTRS spent 100, the market median may have been 95 or 110 or whatever the case is. So we'll have, this will be not viewing it on a position-by-position basis, but instead viewing it on an aggregate basis. However, what makes up the market aggregate would be us running through, for every one of the peers, their specific benefit offerings or programs, if you will, applied to what we'd call the CalSTRS demographics in terms of, for example, if CalSTRS had everyone, let's pick an extreme example, if every employee at CalSTRS had 20 plus years of service, clearly the current benefit spend, especially the DB benefit spend, would be very high based on that years of service. Versus if, on the other hand, they had every single employee with 5 years of service or 2 years, et cetera. So we basically say, take this CalSTRS demographics in terms of years of service, et cetera, we'll apply that to what the peers have in terms of their benefit plans, and ultimately come up with an aggregate spend number that CalSTRS could compare to.
How would you factor that in? I mean, could you just go to the finish line? What would the board do with it? Okay, we got that. Then when it comes time to actually salary setting, and what would you do with that information?
That to us is actually the question that we would, that's a bigger question in terms of what do you want to do with this data? And based on what you want to do, that to me would drive which one of these alternatives makes sense for you. So if you wanted to, alternative 1, for example, would be if you wanted to, when you're making decisions on a position-by-position basis, factor in benefit values, then alternative 1 would be the data set that you want. If, on the other hand, you just want to say, hey, we did our due diligence, we reviewed benefits, we did it in aggregate, so it's imperfect, but in aggregate, we looked, and in total, we know that we have this gap or excess, whatever percentage it is, we're above or below the market, and we're informed by that, but we're not necessarily applying that to any specific positions, then alternative 2 would be the best approach in terms of getting that type of data.
So Michael, before you go on, that begs me to ask another question, and the first part of it I'll go to Jack. Most of our employees would have the same benefit level. There's not a varying degree in benefit levels other than years of service and how much is accumulated, correct?
Not on the benefit side, I can't think of any variation. Clearly, the bonus side, there is variation on the cash side for bonus because that's tiered by level of employees in this comp plan.
Right, but if we're only taking a look at, if like on number 1,
Yeah, I thought that too. Yeah, it's a constancy around.
there's a constancy around the benefits.
That was my take. Melissa, did you agree with that? Just, okay. Yes, so the only variance we have then is the bonus and of course the salary range. Okay.
So Michael, if we have a benefit structure that is very comparable for all the classes of our employees, would there be any benefit in doing something like 2?
So I think that I don't want to say yes or no. I think that the difference and the benefit that you'd get from one would be, well, two would be, for example, the more high level, easier, less expensive methodology. So if you're saying that there is no difference between positions, then I wouldn't think you need to go through the detail that would be
For
in
one.
alternative one. So again, it'd be a
Right.
bigger project for us, but really what you would need is two if that's the case. I think having an understanding of what do our benefits, and again, I'll phrase this, I guess, as a question to you in terms of how much are you concerned about these things. To what extent, for example, how much value, if you're recruiting somebody, is the benefits that you offer for someone who is going to start brand new with no service? So no service credit, that's one level of benefit offering that you're attracting someone.
And possibly,
On the other hand,
and the benefits that they're leaving, correct?
right.
That they would forego by coming here. Okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
on the other hand, you have people internally who say, okay, well, how much of what we're spending is CalSTRS is spending these hard dollars, right? It's a natural cost that you have. And that cost is driven by, while your benefit package is constant for each person, the cost of that in terms of how much you're spending this year is based on varying levels of people with varying levels of service and credits and so on and so forth. So for example, if you had all brand new people this year versus everyone was 15 plus years or whatever the maximum service credit is, your spend would be different. So that while the benefit package itself is the same for everyone, when you're thinking about that, well, what did we spend? What you spent varies based on, would be different by person, not by position, but by person based on service and so forth. So neither one of these, alternative 1, 2, and we haven't talked about 3, neither one is necessarily better or worse. It's ultimately what you're wanting to be able to do with the data.
All righty, thank you. You want to go ahead and explain 3 then?
Sure. So 3 is similar to 2 with basically just a bunch of caveats that rather than going through every single peer's benefit offerings, which is what we do in 2, instead we take some competitive averages or medians and apply them to some aggregate numbers so that in this case on page 3 there's some details. So on the left-hand side, again, this is all made up numbers showing, for example, the salary, the total cash, which is salary plus bonus. We're adding then defined benefit, post-retirement health, whatever the various benefit components are, we can show those. And then for the market, we can show the actual total, so the difference between total cash and total comp in the market, for example, would be those long-term incentives that we talked about before. And in addition, we can make high-level assumptions about DB and health and welfare and defined contribution values. It wouldn't be going through on a peer-by-peer basis. It would basically be taking sort of total industry averages, applying them to the data set, and getting a number that's in the ballpark, but not nearly as precise as alternative 2 would be.
All righty.
And just so you know, the chart here, while I said it's made up numbers, this is actually from a CalPERS presentation from 2 years ago. All the footnotes are missing, but you could see that when they did a similar analysis with us with these some sort of assumptions, their DB and post-retirement health, if you look at that just in dollar terms in the aggregate, so they were spending $15 million in total comp at midpoint. And then on top of that, the DB and post-retirement health would be another approximately $1 million, $633 plus $315. If you look to the right-hand side of the page, you see that the total cash number, which is essentially the number that you also have historically compared to, is $21 million, and the total comp is $27 million. So one of the reasons why the alternative 3, we've even put it in here, recognizing there's lots of assumptions we'd have to do, is that the dollar difference just that the long-term incentives make. So in this case, it's $1 million in DB benefit versus $6.5 million in long-term incentives. that on this example, even without factoring in, this doesn't have any DB value, DC credit, health, or welfare for anything in the competitive market. The long-term incentives alone outweigh the benefits provided. So while the top of the page says illustrative, this was actually a real chart that we used a couple of years ago with your friends across the river. And the magnitude of difference in the long-term incentives is why lots of public funds have have decided that spending the time, resources, and money on alternative 1 or 2 isn't necessarily worthwhile because they know that the gap to market with just what we consider other direct compensation that we're excluding in the private sector, those long-term incentives, that you're so far from even meeting that number that going through the nuances of applying the what we call pennies and dimes for the benefit values in respect to the total compensation spend isn't worth the cost, knowing how far off they are in terms of the gap.
All righty. So are there any comments from anyone on the committee or any of our guests that are attending? Harry?
So I think, Madam Chair, I'd asked for some direction here of the 3 options, and my preference is to look at option 3. And just for see whether or not there's support for that amongst the other committee members. But I do have a question relative to this study. Have we looked at this type of total aggregate compensation for other positions, or is this a new level of inquiry to try to quantify total compensation?
From my experience, this would be a new request. I don't know that we've done this in the past for the comp committee. Cassandra's here, though. She may have. No?
No, we haven't.
This is the first time
Yeah.
we've really tried to quantify total comp. Okay, so I'm suggesting we move with number 3.
All righty. Irena?
I'm not excited to support spending additional money on an analysis, but I still would maintain my view from September that the proposed study, which is already the 51,300, is only studying half of the issue. And the additional 60 to 80,000 seems to me to give a complete picture of compensation. And so the question is really not how much does one cost versus the other, but do you want to have a complete picture of compensation? And, notwithstanding the points made at the end of the presentation, I do still think it's important to see what the cost of the benefits for our employees is compared to market. So, I would still support moving forward with a complete review of the compensation.
The version 1 more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not saying that perhaps we would learn lessons from that would make it unnecessary to do that on a regular basis, but given that it hasn't been done and where those costs are today, I still think it's important information to have.
All right. Betty?
So my question has to do with how useful the data will be coming out of each of these alternatives. And it seems to me while we get the detail in alternative 1, I'm not sure that the data necessarily is useful in that CalSTRS will probably be more constrained than the private sector. And so, but then I look at option 2 and it seems to fulfill, I think, around your goal. And I am a little sensitive to cost, just because this is kind of the other piece of this. So, and then I think the third option just doesn't give us enough beneficial information. So I'm partial to option 2.
All righty. We've got 1, 2, and 3 going. Steve?
Yeah, at the risk of continuing to sort of throw additional thoughts into this, let me first ask a question, which is, how many employees would any of these options apply to? Are we doing it for the entire workforce, or are these particular positions?
No, it would
Just
just be
those
for your statutory positions.
Okay, because that's what I'm used to, having come from the University of California. We do one. Basically, for every position that's called a senior management group person, they have this type of calculation. It does tell you a lot, but one of the questions that comes up, and I'll turn to Arena because their Department of Finance has been, and the governor's office have been very critical of the peers that we use. And I think that goes a long way to determining how comfortable you feel with the data. And so without knowing which peers that you use, then that probably applies to all three examples or alternatives. I think it's a very important thing to consider as you go forward. Having said that, again, maybe it's just what I'm comfortable with and what I've seen before. It is pretty illustrative when you're comparing true peers to see what people in particular positions are being compensated for. And again, you have to, I get all the reasons why you have to, it's apples and oranges with people getting different types of compensation. But I think you're going to get closest to making good judgments about both hiring and retaining and attracting people with the more vivid examples that are provided in alternative one. So that's sort of where I would lean.
Melissa?
And I don't know the cost, so.
So Melissa, can you give us a real quick rundown of what our comparator group is?
So for your executive positions, your comparator group is 67% weighted toward public sector and 33% toward private. For your investment management positions, it's a combination of leading institutional investors, private sector, and I think endowments. But there's and we have the listing too, if you're interested to see who is in that, who are your peers in that group for the public.
Does that help you a little bit, Steve, knowing the
Yeah, I mean, I think
parameters of that?
those seem to be the right ones, but again, without knowing for certain what the
Which each individual one
differences
is.
are. Yeah, I mean, that's why I just say, as long as you feel comfortable that in whatever alternative you pick, that you're getting the right group of comparators, I think that's probably just my light admonition. But again, in terms of the information that you use, I think alternative one gives you the clearest picture as to whether you're appropriate.
I'm sorry, Steve, I clicked you off. I apologize for cutting you off. Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think given the comparative group and the fact that, the specifics of anybody's career, whether they've got a CalSTRS or CalPERS pension or a no pension, or they come from the private sector, since we've got private sector people weighted in here, that we actually need the detail of number one. I think number three really doesn't give us the information we need, and so I would agree with those who suggest that number one is the appropriate way for us to really get as much of an apples to apples comparison as we can, given the fact that our comparator group is apples and oranges.
Michael, through our conversation, are you getting a gist of what we would want to use the information for?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that given you haven't done a review like this in the past, I know there's not consensus, but it seems like having the additional detail in terms of the allowing us information that would be actionable would be best, which is alternative one. You may end up, after this is all said and done, determining that it wasn't worth it in the end, and so you won't maybe do it on a forward-looking basis, but perhaps it's worth doing this one time to get the best data possible now, and then on a go-forward basis, make an assessment on whether you want to have that as part of the pay review process or this is just a one-time thing. So what I hear you saying is getting the best data now would be ideal, but ultimately that's up to you in terms of, making a decision on it.
And you do understand.
I don't want to do one way or the other.
All right, and you do understand why we want it. So that the purpose of what we would be using it for, you were saying earlier, would be the driver. You're getting that from our conversation, correct? Okay,
Right.
okay. Harry?
So having heard my colleagues and for the purpose of trying to get some focus and consensus around this issue, I'm going to make a motion that we direct staff to engage with McLaughlin on option 1 as a motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Harry and seconded by Irena. Is there any further discussion? Michael, do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, not at this time. I'm obviously here for questions if you need it, but.
Alrighty. Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, just very briefly, I would be happy to put you in touch with the folks at UC and their HR department who have done this type of work. Just to, I think more just to get a sense of from them, what are the pluses and minuses of using their system and what they found to be, both positive and negative about the process. So just please let me know, Melissa, and I'd be happy to put you in touch.
Betty?
Just a question on option 1 on timeframe for delivery.
Michael, did you hear the question?
Yeah, so unless something comes up that we don't foresee, our expectation would be that whichever approach you move forward with, we'd be delivering this to you at the April meeting along with the traditional compensation review.
Exactly. We want to marry the two together so they come in at the same time. Right.
Alrighty, I don't see anyone else in line, so I will put the question forward. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Alrighty, the motion passes. Thanks, Melissa. Michael, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Alrighty, and we move right on to the overview of the investment portfolio benchmark review process.
Okay, so this item is just providing the committee with an update relative to the request to conduct an investment portfolio benchmark review. As you may recall during past discussions at investment and compensation committee meetings, it's been revealed, and in some cases, that although CalSTRS Investments has outperformed in comparison to its peers, it's fallen short on reaching its benchmarks relative to investment performance and performance measures for compensation. This benchmark review will aid in determining if investment portfolio benchmarks are ideally aligned to to asset structure and allocation, investment objectives, risk objectives, and performance standards. Staff is planning to partner with investment consultants, Pension Consultant Alliance, and Makita, as well as the Compensation Committee primary compensation strategists, global governance advisors, to assist in this review. Included in the items is a next step outline of what will take place, what steps staff will take to accomplish this effort. And it is anticipated that staff will return to the investment committee to present the results of the review at the investment committee, and then depending on decisions made at that committee, return to the compensation committee to adopt any changes to the compensation policy and administrative procedures. We are targeting a completion of this review for by end of fiscal year 16-17, with it being effective for fiscal year 2017-18.
We're strategizing. Alrighty. Any questions of Melissa of the benchmark review process?
I just wanted to clarify, because there was some discussion, also communication about it coming to the compensation committee, but I was just clarifying in this item that it will first stop in the investment committee.
Right.
For discussion.
Is that what you wanted to?
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to.
Go ahead.
Thanks for the follow-up and the timeline that's delineated here. I just want to stress the importance that we get to a finish line before July 1st of this year. If in fact we want to make any changes, we need to take action in June of this year for next year. So it's real important that we get to that finish line, regardless of the decision we may or may not make to changes. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thanks, Harry. All righty. We have no information requests. You can see our draft agenda for the next committee meeting, which would be in April. Are there any questions on that or any comments? Any statements from the public? Alrighty, so we will adjourn the compensation committee and we will the investment committee will convene at 1 o'clock in closed session. So we are, for staff and for the board, we have about 20 minutes for lunch.
Dana, procedurally,
Go ahead.
can we go right to investments right now, get the agenda approved, and then go into closed session so we don't have to come back out at lunch? Do we have to do that? We do, right?
So you want to do that from over here? Where you have, or go ahead,
Sure, that's a good idea.
go ahead
So why don't we-
and, go ahead and chime in and we'll get your mic open.
Take care of the open session.
Yeah.
Alrighty, go ahead,
Dana,
Harry.
maybe we want to adjourn the,
We're adjourned.
okay, so I'm going to call the investment committee to order. The CalSTRS November 2016 Investment Committee. Agenda item number 1 is the approval of the agenda for today.
I'm sorry, let me jump
Oh,
in.
take-
Let me
take-
jump in, take roll. if you-
Yeah, take roll,
okay.
please, Brian, thanks.
Controller Yi?
Here.
For the State Treasurer, Mr. Juarez?
Here.
Mr. Unterman? Ms. Dillon?
Here.
Ms. Vargas? Mr. Rosensteel? For the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Zamat? For the Director of Department of Finance, Ms. Ortega? Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Bartow. Item 1 is the approval of the committee agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved and properly second. Is there any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda for today, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Okay, so the agenda has been approved. We will now move into closed session, break for lunch and have closed.